Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a really fascinating piece of ancient source material, the biblical text of Ruth, specifically chapter 2. We are going to peel back the layers of this narrative, kind of like an onion. On the surface, sure, it reads like a pretty simple historical account of a poor woman gathering grain. But as we'll see, it's actually an absolute masterclass in revealing hidden, multi-layered grace. Let's get right into it.
All right, part 1, an unexpected, massive harvest.
So picture this. Ruth has just come home after a brutally long day working out in the fields, and she brings back something that literally stops her mother-in-law dead in her tracks. Just listen to this staggering number, 13 kilograms of barley. To put that into perspective, that's like lugging around a medium-sized dog in a basket all the way home. It is an absolutely impossible amount for a poor widow to glean in a single day. I mean, gleaning was strictly meant for the poorest of the poor to just pick up dropped scraps. So coming on with 13 kilos, that instantly signals that an unprecedented, totally miraculous event has just taken place.
Which brings us to our second layer, truly seen by grace. Our source text constantly reminds us just how incredibly vulnerable Ruth really is. She's a foreigner from Moab, which, historically speaking, was a nation completely at odds with Israel. She's a widow, she's deeply impoverished, and she sits at the absolute very bottom of society's ladder. Put yourself in her shoes for just a second. Out there in a busy, crowded field full of workers, it would have been so easy and honestly kind of expected for her to be completely ignored, or worse, chased away entirely.
And that explains Naomi's reaction. When she sees this massive haul of grain, she says, "May he who took notice of you be blessed." Now, if we look at the original linguistic context of our source, the word used for taking notice doesn't just mean having passive sympathy. It means actively recognizing someone, deliberately singling them out from the crowd, and choosing to care for them. Boaz didn't just casually glance her way, he intentionally recognized her worth and actively extended grace to her, when she was, for all intents and purposes, invisible to everyone else.
And this brilliantly illustrates a much larger pattern found throughout the source text. Think about figures like Hagar or Leah back in Genesis. Being seen by God in our darkest, most invisible moments. That's always the starting point of grace. A lot of the time, we're so desperate to spot God working in our lives, but the reality is, before we ever see Him, He has already seen us. He's silently working in the background, preparing the field long before we even step foot into it.
Moving right along to section 3, redemption behind the grace.
In the text, Naomi asks Ruth, "Where did you work today?" Now, obviously, that's a logistical question, but it's also a deeply powerful question for us to ponder. I want to pause for a second and challenge you to look at your own life. Where did you work today? Or better yet, where is the unmerited grace in your life actually coming from? We get so used to our comforts, right? We just assume they're the direct result of our own hard work. But who is truly providing the harvest?
Asking that question triggers a massive 180-degree shift in Naomi. Look at chapter 1. She is deeply bitter, telling everyone in town that God has dealt bitterly with her. But fast forward to chapter 2, and she begins to bless God, finally recognizing His hidden hand at work. And think about this. Actually, this is crucial. Her physical reality hasn't even changed yet. She's still a grieving widow without any land. But her spiritual eyes have been opened. The environment is exactly the same, but her perspective, totally transformed.
To really grasp why she shifts so dramatically, we have to look at a core theological anchor in the text. It's the concept of hesed. When Naomi praises the one who hasn't abandoned his kindness, she's leaning heavily into this incredibly rich Hebrew word. Hesed means grace, mercy, loyalty, and this covenantal, unwavering kind of love. It teaches us that God's grace isn't just some random lucky break, it's a continuous, loyal attribute of who He fundamentally is.
And then, Naomi realizes the absolute biggest plot twist of the narrative. Boaz isn't just a nice, generous boss, he is a kinsman redeemer. Based on ancient Israelite law from Leviticus and Deuteronomy, a kinsman redeemer had the legal power to buy back land that a poor relative had sold. And crucially, they could marry a childless widow to keep the family line from going extinct. Suddenly, the gears of redemption start turning. Guys, this isn't just about getting enough food to survive the week anymore. It's a total game changer about the salvation of their entire family legacy.
Which leads us to section 4, grace upon grace protection.
Now that we know who Boaz actually is, we can fully appreciate the overwhelming, above and beyond generosity he shows Ruth. It's what the text essentially describes as grace upon grace. He doesn't just hand her a bag of grain and send her off. He builds 3 massive layers of protection around her.
First, provision. He tells her to stay with his workers until the whole harvest is finished. Second, identity. He calls her daughter, instantly removing that harsh outsider stigma. And third, safety. He strictly commands his workers not to harm her. He literally covers every single one of her vulnerabilities.
So the big takeaway from our source analysis today is this. God's grace is never just a one-off event, and it certainly isn't dependent on our fluctuating feelings or our ability to spot it in the moment. Because grace is an inherent attribute of God, it's continuous. It's steadily working in the dark, laying foundations and prepping kinsman redeemers way before we have the faith to even recognize it.
Finally, Section 5, Faith and Hope Awaken.
Once you realize that God's grace is actively working, it fundamentally transforms despair into action. Naomi tells Ruth, "My daughter, go with his young women." She reclaims her protective, maternal role here. Experiencing this grace completely restores her. It proves for sure that true grace doesn't cause us to just give up or lie flat. It empowers us. It gives us the actual courage we need to make wise choices and step boldly into the future.
The contrast between where we started and where we are now, it couldn't be starker. Chapter 1 ended in this bleak, hopeless void of shared pain with zero prospects. But Chapter 2, it ends with this beautifully warm domestic picture. Ruth and Naomi are living safely, sharing their meals, and weathering the harvest season together with a really tangible, shared hope.
We'll wrap up our explainer today with this powerful connection to John 1:16. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. What's so incredibly beautiful about the source material we analyzed today is how God gently, so gently, healed Naomi's bitterly broken heart. He just poured out continuous grace. And notice, he never once stopped to rebuke her for her past complaints or her lack of faith. He just kept providing. So as we close, I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. Where is that very same quiet, steady, grace upon grace operating in the background of your own life right now? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and keep learning.